Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Duke Alumni Association's 2020 post-election panel. I'm Deandra Rose. I'm on the faculty at the Sanford School of Public Policy, and I serve as the Director of Research for Polis, the Center for Politics. And on behalf of the Duke Alumni Association and the entire Duke family, I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event. I'm sure that many of you will agree that the year 2020 has been dizzying with an unprecedented array of events, from COVID-19 to the Black Lives Matter movement to a presidential election that was full of twists and turns. It was one for the books. So tonight, an all-star panel of political experts who are Duke alums will help us to make sense of this historic presidential election, as well as the impact that key congressional and gubernatorial races will have on the political landscape and the policyscape. So we had the capacity to accommodate 3,000 people at tonight's event, and I'm excited to say that we are at capacity. We're grateful to each and every one of you for being with us tonight, and we want to send a very special shout out to all of the Duke alumni who are in the house this evening. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for tonight's event, Judy Woodruff. Judy Woodruff is a broadcast journalist and trustee emeritus of Duke University. She's the anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour. She's covered politics and other news for 5 decades at NBC, CNN, and PBS. Judy Woodruff's reporting career began in Atlanta, Georgia, where she covered state and local government. She's the author of This is Judy Woodruff at the White House, which was published by Addison Wesley in 1982. Judy Woodruff is a founding co-chair of the International Women's Media Foundation, an organization dedicated to promoting and encouraging women in journalism and communication industries worldwide. Among her many awards, she's the recipient of the Radcliffe Medal, the Poynter Medal for Lifetime Achievement in Journalism, the Gwen Ifill Press Freedom Award, and the Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism. She's also received the Edward R. Murrow Lifetime Achievement Award in television from the Washington State University. She was inducted into the Georgia Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and she's the recipient of the Duke University Distinguished Alumni Award, among many others. So please join me in welcoming Judy Woodruff.
Hi there, Deandra. Thank you so much for the generous introduction. Great to see you and great to be with all of you. A week after the election, which is still going on. I think it's not what the organizers thought when this program was first put together. They thought maybe a week later we'd be well into post-election, but of course the votes are still being counted, and we're waiting the formal outcome, even though of course we have someone who's been declared the president-elect. But there's a lot to talk about. As Deandra said, it's been quite a year. So I am excited to introduce this extraordinary panel of folks you're going to hear from right now. And I'm going to introduce them in order. So forgive me, I'm going to be reading, but you're going to see them shortly. Our first panelist is Maria Cardona, a seasoned public policy advocate and political strategist. Maria has more than 2 decades of experience in both government, in politics, in public relations, and community affairs arenas, recognized among the most influential Latinas in the country. Maria is a principal at the Dewey Square Group, leading the multicultural and public affairs practices. She appeared frequently as a political commentator on MSNBC, on Fox, on Univision, and Telemundo, prior to signing on exclusively with CNN and CNN en Espanol as a political contributor. So please welcome Maria Cardona. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Judy.
Absolutely. And our next panelist is John Harwood. John is a CNN, also White House correspondent, the correspondent. He currently covers President Trump and his administration. Previously, he served as CNBC's chief Washington correspondent from 2006 to 2019. John Harwood has offered political analysis for the New York Times, for NBC, for MSNBC, for NPR, and for PBS. He has covered each of the last 9 presidential elections. He received an Emmy nomination for his live CNBC town hall with President Obama in 2010. He also moderated Republican presidential debates on CNBC in 2011 and 2015. So please welcome John Harwood. Hi, John.
Hey, Judy.
Our third panelist is Nia Malika Henderson. She is senior political reporter for CNN, reporting on politics, on policy, and the people who are shaping Washington. Nia Malika reports for the network's digital and television platforms both. She regularly appears as a panelist on CNN's Inside Politics, on The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and CNN Tonight with Don Lemon. She also often serves as fill-in anchor for Inside Politics. She joined the network in 2015 and most recently covered the 2016 election, the presidential transition, President Trump's administration, of course, and the Democratic Party. During the 2016 election season, she reported on the Democratic and Republican candidates, covering Bernie Sanders' insurgent campaign, Ben Carson's bid, and President Trump's realignment of the Republican Party. Please welcome Nia Malika Henderson. Hi, Nia Malika.
Hey, Judy. Good to be here.
And finally, joining us is Neil Newhouse. Neil is a partner and co-founder of Public Opinion Strategies, a national political and public affairs research firm, which has been described by the New York Times as, quote, the leading Republican polling company in the country. Neil has been named Pollster of the Year by the American Association of Political Consultants 3 times for his work on political and public affairs campaigns. He's worked in public opinion research for more than 35 years. He's helped elect, I'm running out of breath, dozens of members of Congress, U.S. senators, governors. He has served as the Republican partner in the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. He has polled for 4 presidential campaigns, for Robert Dole, for George W. Bush, for former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and he was the lead pollster for Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign. Please welcome Neil Newhouse. Hi, Neil. So it's so great to see all of you. What an amazing panel. We are so lucky. So I quickly want to get to the most important question, which is what in the world happened in this election? And Neil, I'm going to come to you first to explain. I was just looking again at the Real Clear Politics average going in. The forecast was that Joe Biden was more than 7 points ahead, maybe 10, and he was going to sweep the country. He's still ahead. He's 3% ahead in the count at this point. I just looked; it's about 5 million votes separating in the popular vote. It looks like he's going to win the electoral vote. But what happened? We need you to turn on your microphone. We need you to. There we go.
I'm literally shocked I got the first question. Who would agree? I mean, really, yeah, it's not the first time I've been asked that question, how the polls went wrong. Let me start it off by talking about 2 factors that might help explain this. First, we start with shy Trump voters and then poll deniers, basically. We've been trying to demonstrate that there was a shy Trump vote for 4 years and couldn't find the right question, couldn't really find a way to demonstrate it. On election night, we did an election night survey of 1,600 voters across the country. And just on a lark, we asked the question among Trump voters, asked if they told their friends who they're voting for, or if they told their friends, or if they kept their vote preference a secret. 19% of Trump voters said they kept their preference a secret from their friends. These voters tended to be married women, higher income, higher educated, living in the suburbs. It helps explain to some extent why Trump did as well as he did in the suburbs. He didn't win the suburbs, but he did better than was expected. But these are the kinds of people who found it socially embarrassing to admit to their liberal friends they were supporting Trump, and it makes sense that they didn't want to admit they weren't voting for him. They were voting for him. But the other key group, and I think it's more significant, is what we call the poll deniers. These are voters who listened to President Trump rail against the polls for 5 years. They believe that pollsters have an agenda that doesn't include them. They believe pollsters are up to no good, that they produce fake polls, And so they refuse to cooperate. And they kind of wear it as a badge that they refuse to be interviewed. I think
Neil, are you actually up to no good?
people might disagree with that. I don't know. But I think that's one reason why they got left out of the polls. But you're right. And it's the surge of Republican voters, of rural voters, of Trump supporters who came to the polls late. Trump won late deciders by 20 points in this election. So I think that it helps explain it. But I agree. I mean, there's reason for, I understand the skepticism people have when they look at some of these national data and they look at the actual vote results and they don't match up.
Well, I want to come back to polling in a minute because there was a lot to talk about. But Maria, I want to come to you because Donald Trump, and I want to make this all about Donald Trump because after all, Joe Biden's winning. But
Right.
Maria, what happened, not just with the Latino vote, but overall, what happened from your perspective?
So I think what happened is that, and Neil's right, I think there were a lot of people who ended up supporting Donald Trump and they didn't show up in the polls, and they were, I don't think they weren't just shy about it, but I think they were embarrassed about it, frankly. From the standpoint of Democrats, because it really was a little bit of a shock. A couple of days prior to the election, I was talking to some folks at the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They were thinking that they were going to gain 10 to 15 seats. Now, granted, they put the caveat on there that it all depended on how well Joe Biden did, but I think they expected at least to gain seats, not lose seats, which is what happened, right? There were so many folks who, even in elections past, were cautious and careful, who were saying that they were sure that Democrats were going to take over the Senate. So there was a lot of enthusiasm, I think, for Joe Biden that really, I think, went over into all of the other Senate and House seats. And it gave way to this feeling that there was going to be a blue wave. Let me talk a little bit about the Latino vote, because I'm so glad you asked that question, Judy. So there had been some talk, and Nia and I were texting about this constantly because she was reporting on it and she wanted to get, all the right numbers. I'd been working informally, not just with the Biden campaign, but with also all of the activists who were out, had been registering and mobilizing and energizing Latino voters for the last 4 years. They were convinced that Joe Biden was going to blow it up with the Hispanic vote, even as he left the convention with stories that he wasn't doing as well as Hillary Clinton. And at that point, he wasn't. But here's what happened. Joe Biden actually did get historic percentages of the Hispanic vote. And with all due respect to my friend Neil Newhouse, Neil, I saw your presentation. The exit polls in terms of the Hispanic vote are historically deeply flawed, and they are again this year, probably more so. The real numbers of the Hispanic vote for Joe Biden in Florida, other than in Miami-Dade, and I'll talk about Miami-Dade in a second, other than in Miami-Dade, in Florida, in Arizona, in Nevada, in Colorado, and even in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, they were through the roof. Latinos supported Joe Biden between 75 and 82%, depending on the county that you are in. We had a problem in Miami-Dade. There's no question about that. Miami-Dade is a county that Hillary Clinton won, that Obama won, and that Biden just certainly did not take the numbers that he should have. There was a lot of misinformation and disinformation that targeted the Hispanic community on Spanish language radio and digital and social media that permeated, that the Trump campaign had been doing for the last 2 years. And it was sadly super successful. And there was, communities of Colombian American, and that really, hurts my soul because I'm Colombian and my dad lives in Florida, and he saw this. Like, all of his friends were saying, oh my God, if we elect Joe Biden, this is going to become Venezuela and Cuba, right? So that worked. The Biden campaign did it had a campaign on the ground to fight against it, Judy, but they did it way too late. They
Right.
put in a lot of investment and it was way too late. So I'll leave it there and we can
Yeah.
talk about it.
And we know in South Texas on the border, there were issues as well.
Yes, on the Rio Grande Valley, that's exactly right.
Right. John Harwood, what would you add? How do you explain the outcome of this election? What would you add?
Well, Judy, I'd say it's a fairly simple outcome. And that is, throughout Donald Trump's presidency, he's been an unpopular president. He has trailed Joe Biden since 2019, when Joe Biden got in the race. I think that the coronavirus did not create his deficit against Joe Biden, but it may have prevented him from overcoming it. We saw nationally that Biden established a pretty consistent lead. He will not end up in the popular vote with the size of the lead that he had, but he is coming in very close to the number that was registered in the polls. And this is where I'd give Neil and his colleagues in the polling industry credit. Biden's going to end up with 51 or 52% of the vote. Most of the polling showed him with that, but you did have a move in the last month of undecideds, relatively small number of undecideds toward Donald Trump. But the other thing that I would say is I was incredibly impressed with the success of the Republican Party and the Trump campaign in turning out their vote. When we saw these enormous lines in places like Houston, Harris County in Texas, and elsewhere, I assumed, because Donald Trump was a net negative, unpopular president for quite a long time, that vote, like the heavy turnout in 2018,
Right.
was heavy with anti-Trump voters, suburban women, people of color, others who were mobilizing against Donald Trump. And in reality, what happened was that, yes, Democrats did have a spectacular turnout, but Republicans did as well. And I am surprised that after 4 years of his administration, it's one thing to turn people out in 2016 when you're running against Hillary Clinton, who was comparatively unpopular as a Democratic nominee, when you're promising a change, a partisan change after 8 years of one-party control. You're an outsider, you're a businessman, you're making a lot of outlandish claims about what you can accomplish. That's one thing. But after you've been president for 4 years, people have seen your style. They have not liked your style. They have seen very mixed results in terms of what you've actually gotten done. And then you get to 2020 and you have a pandemic, and the administration has botched the pandemic, and people can see that. I assumed that the turnout was going to be much more tilted against Trump than it turned out to be. That was the biggest error, I think, that I made analytically in the campaign. But other than that, the campaign went pretty well as expected. Donald Trump was unpopular. Joe Biden held a lead, and he will win comfortably in the popular vote. He will win with electoral votes to spare, although there were close races in many states. It is true that Republicans did significantly better in House and Senate races than many people expected. But I think that the big story was Trump and Biden, and it went as we expected.
All right, Nia Malika, what would you add to that? And it's my fault for dragging it out and saying no limit on time for this first question. I'm going to give you no limit on time. And after this, we're going to move it along because there's a lot to cover. Alumni suggested some great questions, but I really do want to hear what your take is on the result, Nia Malika.
Listen, I think for 4 years, millions of Americans were feeling a lot of stress, some fear, and some anxiety living under Donald Trump. And you saw that relief and release with those folks dancing in the streets in cities across this country. My wife was taking out the trash, and she knew that they had called it for Biden when she heard honking horns and music playing and people banging on pots and pans outside in the street. So that is my take on what happened. And you did see a turnout among African Americans that you didn't see for Hillary Clinton. There were about a 12% of the electorate in 2016 that moved up to 13%. We'll see what the exit polls end up saying. And the same for Latinos. Maria talked about that. They were about 11% in 2016. They were 13% of the electorate in 2020. So that's what you saw. So you are seeing Biden be able to essentially do what he promised to do and what people thought he would do, which is to turn those blue states or those states that the blue wall states in the Midwest, he turned those back. And he did that partly with the Obama coalition and then partly with what might be called Bill Clinton's old coalition of white voters, did better with white working class voters and then those white suburban voters as well. And so now we found ourselves in this situation where he did what he was supposed to do, did what people predicted he would do, did what Donald Trump was afraid he could do, right? I mean, that's why he was so nervous about Joe Biden going way back to the Ukraine impeachment scandal. And so that's where we end up. So now, you know, we'll see what Donald Trump does. I think he's doing what we thought he would do, which is to go out grabbing a conspiracy theory in the way that he came into the White House, grabbing onto a conspiracy theory. But, you know, I do think we're in this period where you have these two parties that are largely race-based parties. Republicans are overwhelmingly a white party, though they did make some inroads among Latinos and some African Americans. And then you have Democrats that are a much more multiracial coalition, and you have Republicans having to decide whether or not they're going to play to the racial anxiety of white voters as a strategy in the way that Donald Trump did. And listen, almost possibly could have gotten away with it if this had gone on a few more weeks.
I wanted to turn to what Trump is doing right now, but Neil Newhouse, respond to what Nia Malika just said about, I mean, are these two parties still defined by race, that the Republicans are the mainly white party, that there really weren't, there were some gains, but not significant gains with minorities for Republicans?
Well, we also had more House Republican women elected than ever before, but I don't, the background of all this is the country is still deeply divided. I mean, Joe Biden almost blew this election. He almost threw this away. He almost lost this thing. This was much closer than anybody thought, much closer than the Biden team thought. And it reveals a real divide. I mean, these parties have never been further apart. There's a great stat from a recent poll. 80% of Republicans think that Democrats are socialists, and 80% of Democrats think Republicans are racist. And that's, you know, and when you and then backing up, based on our poll, 91% of Americans voted a straight ticket. Now, and so just, you know, 9% split their ticket. In 2000, it was 36% split their ticket, and now it's just 9%. People are voting straight party, and America has never been more divided than it is now.
And I do want to get to that as we move ahead. But first, or a part of it, I do want to talk about what President Trump is doing. We've never seen a president where the preponderance of news organizations have declared a winner, and we haven't seen a concession, at least in the modern era. And I interviewed somebody who's looked into this tonight on the NewsHour, and he was saying we haven't had a president in history who absolutely refused to concede. But Maria, what is going on here? I mean, what is your read on what President Trump is trying to do? He clearly wants to win re-election. We know that. But how far do you think he's prepared to go to burn down the House if necessary in order to stay?
You know, it's interesting that you use that analogy, Judy, because couple of months before the election, when I knew I saw all of the polls and everyone was so sure that Joe Biden was going to win, and I was confident he was going to win. And the campaign was confident he was going to win. The campaign never believed the hype of Joe Biden being ahead by 17 points, by the way. They sent a memo like a week out, 2 weeks out, saying, don't believe these polls. This is a lot closer than what the public polls are saying. So I think they were very smart in doing that. But I said exactly what you just said, Judy. I said, this president, if he loses, he is going to burn down the house before he leaves it. And that is exactly what he's doing. And Nia mentioned this. This is a president who has never respected any norm, any tradition, anything that has been done before, even if it's for the good of the republic, for the good of the country. He doesn't care. The only thing that moves him is his impulses and his ego. And for him, and he even said it himself, that if he were to lose, that would be the most difficult thing in the world for him. So at least he's honest on that end. And so I think that what he's doing now is a reflection of his impulses and his ego. He can't stand it. He doesn't, what I don't know, and I would love Neil's input on this, is whether he actually really doesn't believe that he lost, or he's just saying that to burn down the house, to make this as difficult as possible for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to put back together, to rile up his supporters so that they believe that this was a stolen election. But regardless of the reason for it, Judy, I think his behavior is indicative and proof as to why so many people never believed that he had the temperament to be president of the United States.
But he did get elected, and now he's saying he.
Yeah, and he got 71 million votes.
Go ahead, Neil. Neil, what did you say?
No, and he got 71 million votes. I mean,
He did.
It's gonna, these things take time. He's gonna, I'm sure, want to exhaust all legal remedies, but it's gonna fall in line eventually. But trying to push him further out is makes him want to push back even further. So it's just going to take time. 4 or 5 months from now, this is going to be past history. People will have forgotten about this.
Oh, I doubt that. This is going to be written in the history books, I think.
Yeah. Well, it may be, Maria, but this same guy who got impeached, and how did the impeachment play in this election? I mean, it was never even brought up.
Let me ask John and Nia Malika about what you think the president is accomplishing here, and whether it's doing long-lasting damage to the country or not.
I mean, certainly I think it's doing long-lasting damage to the country. I think it's anti-democratic. I think it's indicative of a president who rose to power on a racist conspiracy theory, and now he's ending his president on a racist conspiracy theory, because that's what it is, right? It is this notion that people in Philly, Black people, people in Detroit, Black people, people in Atlanta, Black people, stole the election from him. So he is playing again to those white anxieties about, sort of the coming demographic shift in this country. So in that way, I think he is playing to type. He is playing to his base. I think it's incredibly dangerous as well. I think it also binds him to his voters, in a way that somebody like Marco Rubio, somebody like Mike Pompeo wants those voters too if they want to run in 2024. I think they may soon realize that Donald Trump himself might actually run in 2024. He's establishing a pack as well. Either he runs in 2024, threatens to run in 2024, or there's some other Trump who runs in 2024. I think what we don't know about the 70 million voters that he got is how many are sort of Trump dead enders, right? The people who are just Trump or bust, and how many of those folks are just sort of garden variety Republicans. But this idea that somehow, he needs time. Nobody else really needed time. I mean, Donald Trump is a grown man. He's not a child. Somebody,
Is he though?
You're right. I mean, described him as a child, so that might be, relying on her definition there. So yeah, listen, I thought Joe Biden handled it masterfully today when he came out and said, listen, the transition is ongoing. He's going to be inaugurated on January 20th, and there's only one president at a time. I think he was displaying why people turn to him and away from the chaos that Donald Trump's presidency has embodied.
John, do you think the president will, as Neil says, come around in days, weeks, months to come? And do you think the Republican Party is in any way going to be separating itself from Donald Trump in the future?
I do think Donald Trump will leave on January 20th. If that means come around, yes, he will. Look, I think the basic fact is Donald Trump is not a psychologically healthy person. He is a slave to his ego, as Maria said, to his impulses. He cares literally about no one other than himself. He could care less about the Republican Party. He's not really a Republican. That was a helpful vehicle for him personally, but that is of no interest to him. So I think there's part of it that he's having trouble processing the humiliation of being defeated, and it's partly trying to cover his retreat, to try to go out not with a whimper but with a bang. It is hard for me to tell how long lasting the damage will be because he's so idiosyncratic as a person. I've never seen anyone like him in politics. My instinct, and Neil would be a much better authority on this than me, that is that once he leaves the stage, a whole bunch of ambitious Republicans will have a much stronger interest in separating themselves from him and establishing their own identity. And I personally doubt that he will run in 2024 and be the Republican nominee. But I think this is largely about him trying to save face, and for Republican leaders who are pretty cynically sort of making their peace with him, they're trying to use what he's doing to propel their own careers individually, and also the outcome of these two Senate races in Georgia that are going to happen in early January.
We could spend the entire hour talking about President Trump and what happened and his influence on the Republican Party, on the country and everything. But I do want to, we're now at the point where we've got 25 minutes left to talk about the whole picture. And I do want to spend some time on Joe Biden. Neil Newhouse, as you look at the American electorate and how much of a mandate, I hate that term, how much of a support does Joe Biden have behind him to do what he needs to do as you look at the new makeup of the Senate? And I realize we don't know the outcome of the Georgia Senate races, but and the stronger Republican presence in the House, how much can he get done, do you think?
I think he's got his work cut out for him. It's divided government once again. And in terms of if he'd won by 8 or 9 points, if this were over election night, then you'd think, and if Democrats had won the Senate, obviously there's a mandate. But Americans really were sending a mixed message with this election, electing Joe Biden, but kind of reinforcing Republicans in lower levels. So I think there's going to be a real challenge for him, and I think that just as John pointed out, the division within the Republican Party is going to be extreme. But right now, it's Donald Trump's Republican Party. There's not really someone out there who can challenge him. But I think the Democrats have their challenges as well in terms of the pull between the moderates, the Joe Biden moderates, and the AOC and the liberals within the party. So I think he's going to face challenges within his own party as well as from Republicans in Congress.
You said Biden doesn't have a 7 or 8 point lead, but in modern presidential elections, the distance is usually 3% max. Barack Obama won by 3 or 4%. He was over 50%. Right now, Joe Biden's over 50%. But right. Be that as it may, Maria, what do you see? What do you expect that Biden will be able to get done given this complicated political environment?
I think Joe Biden was exactly the right candidate for the Democrats for this moment. And Nia, I don't know if you remember the conversation we had early on. The ticket that I predicted was Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. And I think that what this election showed is, as much as I loved and admired all of the candidates that ran, I don't think any of them could have beat Donald Trump at this point. Joe Biden had everything that it took. He had the experience. He had, let's just say it, the fact that he was an old white man really helped him out, given what he needed to do in building back up the blue wall. He also had a connection to clearly the African-American community, because if it wasn't for African-American voters, he would not be president today. He wouldn't have even won our Democratic primary. But I think most of all, Judy, and this is something that he is using, I think, to perfection. He's not using it, it's just who he is. The huge contrast between Donald Trump, the person, and his character, and Joe Biden, the person, and his character was just, that gap was bigger than the Grand Canyon. And I think the moment that Joe Biden announced his campaign, calling it the fight for the soul of America, I think is what defined it. And he was so disciplined. He and Kamala Harris and the whole campaign were so disciplined and always coming back to that, frankly, aided by Donald Trump, because he couldn't help himself, right?
And do you think that will tell us what he's able to get done as president?
Well, so what I think that will be able to get done, I was getting to this. I think so. He was the right candidate for the moment, but I also think that the fact that we didn't have a landslide, that the Senate, might be 50-50 if we're lucky, but maybe not. And maybe it's even better if it's not for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is going to be given the opportunity to do what he does best. And that is do deals, negotiate with the other side, do something that's bipartisan. And he will be able to push back, to Neil's point, because Neil's right, the progressive left is going to be a huge push-pull for Joe Biden within the party. But if we have a divided Congress, then Joe Biden will be able to say, look, I can't do that because there's no way that is going to be supported. I need to do this, I need to go more middle of the road. And that, I think, is going to allow him to get things done and to be able to credibly push back on the progressive left of our party.
What are your expectations, John, for him?
Look, I think it's going to be difficult, and I think that I think I'm closer to Neil than Maria in thinking that it's going to be, as much as Joe Biden wants to make deals with Republicans in Congress and has a vision of the way Washington works that is consistent with that, I'm not sure that's the Washington that we have. On the other hand, for all of the unyielding opposition that Mitch McConnell gave to Barack Obama throughout his term, there are a couple things that are different. First of all, Joe Biden is white, and a lot of the visceral impulse within the Tea Party movement, within the Trump constituency, within the resistance to Obama, I think was connected to race and the prospect that the country's changing. We're headed to be a majority minority country. So I think the fact that Joe Biden is an older white man, as Maria said, that's a significant fact. Second thing is, Mitch McConnell has not been in a situation when he was the majority leader of the Senate facing a Democratic House and a Democratic president. So when he became majority leader in 2014, you had a Republican House. The Republican House staked out the far right flank. And then you had Obama on the left, and then you had Mitch McConnell able to make deals in the middle. In this arrangement, there will be a greater ability for Democrats to put pressure on McConnell. So McConnell's may seek to have a wall of resistance, but I think it will be harder to maintain that wall with Pelosi sending legislation his way, legislation that she and Joe Biden have determined is popular, and they have a greater ability to put pressure on him than occurred in the past with Obama.
Nia Malika, you want to pick up on that? What do you see that he's going to be able to do, and what are you going to have the most trouble with?
Yeah, I think he's going to have a lot of trouble with the Republicans. I think what we see now with the response to Donald Trump and refusing to acknowledge that he's the president-elect, that Biden's the president-elect, is a preview, I think, of how they'll treat Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden's main mandate from people, the 75 million or so who voted for him, is to be normal and to be boring and to turn away from the chaos of the last 4 years, and then dealing with COVID, the health problem, and also the economic problem that it's caused. And I think he will get some areas of cooperation with some of these folks who are in particularly red states, where you are seeing an explosion of these cases, and certainly impacts all over their states. So, in terms of kind of big ticket legislation, I'm not sure where he's going to be able to go on that. Maybe you get some big stimulus package. Either they do that in the lame duck, or that's part of one of the first things he's able to do. But in terms of a lot of the things that he ran on, whether it was climate, whether it was healthcare, I don't see that getting done. But again, I think the main thing that Joe Biden needs to do for Americans is just to not be a jackass, essentially, because I think a lot of Americans look at the president currently, and that is why they voted against him, because of his behavior and his tweeting. And I think Joe Biden will go a long way in just being sort of a normal president.
But Nia, you do have to admit one thing. The Republicans do accept that Joe Biden is an American citizen who was born in the United States.
That's true.
Right.
That's different.
That is different.
Neil, to what extent, Neil, is the clock ticking, though? I mean, John referred to the House being majority Democrats, even though they lost seats. We're coming up on the 2022 election, where I'm told Democrats are concerned, about a number of House seats. I mean, given clock ticking, and how much pressure does that put on Biden to get whatever he can get done as fast as possible?
Well, the rule of thumb for a president is you get it done in your first term, because after that, you always lost. But 2020, if I were a Democrat looking at the 2000 election in the House and Senate, I'd be scared to death about looking ahead to 2022. I mean, that's because the first midterm election of a president, the party in power traditionally loses seats. Well, the margins in the House have narrowed. There's a hell of a good chance Republicans could pick up even more seats in 2022, which gives Biden a 2-year window of opportunity. So time is running out. He's got to get things done quickly, got to get things done really in the first 6 months before things turn political and you go to the midterm elections.
There's so many things to bring up with you all. One of them is healthcare. We saw before the Supreme Court today. It doesn't look like the court's going to overturn the ACA, but I do want to bring up the pandemic and ask you, how much is that? Is it changing what Washington is able to do? Has it changed, Maria?
The pandemic certainly was a big pressure on the election, and I think it was John who mentioned it, or maybe all three, Nia and Neil as well, that it was a big shadow over the election against Donald Trump. Right now, I got an alert on my phone that hospitalizations have reached a record level today. And so that, I think, and Neil talked about the 2022 elections, I think those might be a referendum on how Joe Biden does on the pandemic, because he put this front and center. And so I think that what they are going to be trying to do head on, first and foremost, is to crush the virus in a way that he had already been talking about it for so long, right? Putting together a national strategy, working with governors to put in maybe not a national mandate, but to put in a mandate for states to push mask wearing, social distancing. Are we going to have to close down the economy in some of these states and some of these cities? Maybe. And a lot of folks won't like that. So, I do think that this is going to be the one issue, because it was the one issue in the campaign that Joe Biden kind of said, yeah, judge me on this because I'm going to be so much different on this than Donald Trump was. And thankfully, I think, because that's exactly what we need. But then it's going to then be like, well, okay, how is this going to turn out, right? It's not an easy thing, but it's also something that so many scientists and experts have said, look, just do these 5 or 6 things and we will be able to get the virus under control. And if we're able to get the virus under control, the economy then follows. And if the economy then follows and he's able to get to a point where we're starting to put people back to work, then I think that will be a good thing for Joe Biden. And I do think that that's something that Washington can get done. I don't know if I'm being Pollyanna here, but, I do want to think that both Democrats and Republicans want to make sure that we don't continue to have, several 9/11s of Americans dying a week because this president has completely ignored this pandemic.
We did get some good news about a vaccine.
Right.
In the last day.
Could I just get in on this?
Yes.
I think there is a tremendous upside for Joe Biden on the pandemic. Donald Trump, forget ideology, forget his policy goals. He's an incompetent manager, and he's surrounded himself with incompetent people. And you can see that by the fact that half the administration has gotten coronavirus themselves.
Right.
And the pandemic is spiking to a frightening degree. The simple administration of a competent testing program, a competent public messaging program about on masks and social distancing. It's not clear how much you can affect public opinion in red states where people have absorbed the messaging that Trump has offered and are disdaining it. But I think the needle can be moved to some degree on there. And then you have the backstop of this great news on the vaccine. And so I think the combination of a competent administration plus the onset of a vaccine, you have the prospect of getting control of the virus in the first few months of 2021 in a way that we don't have now. And that in turn is the most important thing that can happen to propel the economy forward. And all of that is sitting in front of Joe Biden. He's going to have an experienced team around him. The very first thing he did after being declared the president-elect was announce this COVID task force. Right. And so I think he is set up for success there. They have to execute now, and we'll see if they do, but he's set up in a good place, I think.
And Nia Malika, you may have pushback from some Republican governors who don't like, who knows what form any mandate would take, if it would just be a strong suggestion or whatever. Right now, the governors are used to calling the shots themselves.
Yeah, that I think is the worry for Joe Biden. If sort of the COVID approach becomes highly identified with the Democratic Party and a Democratic president, do you see these Republican governors in states like Florida and Texas that are already dug in on kind of anti-mask mandates? Do they dig in even further to sort of show their opposition to Democratic policies that they see as socialism and controlling people's lives and harming business efforts? So, we'll see what happens. I mean, but I do worry about that in terms of does Joe Biden just harden some of the partisanship that we see around COVID as it is, kind of going forward.
Hey, and Judy, one other thing, to kind of going off what Maria and John said, if COVID kind of is solved or we're on the downswing a year and a half from now, my prediction is Donald Trump will claim victory and will basically say that Joe Biden put into place his policies and his voters will buy onto it and believe it. So there are going to be two sides of this thing. And it's just the same kind of thing. I mean, Donald Trump claimed the economy was his when, Obama started it. And when Joe Biden, hopefully succeeds in on coronavirus, Donald Trump's going to claim victory as well.
So you think he'll run in 2024?
I think he's going to lay it out there and try to freeze the field.
Oh, Jesus.
Try to what? What did you
Freeze the field.
say? The field?
Freeze the field.
God help
It
us.
was Maria's reaction that
Marco Rubio today was tweeting about Donald Trump in 2024. Neil, this is a serious question. Is there anything Donald Trump says that his supporters won't go along with? I mean, they seem to be accepting everything he claims.
Yeah, I mean, it is Donald Trump's Republican Party. Even with all the work the Lincoln Project, all these groups did, these Republican groups who then came out against the president, everything they did, Donald Trump won as much or a higher percentage of Republicans as Joe Biden won Democrats. He's got a stranglehold in the Republican Party right now.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, Nia, and then I want to come with a final question for all of you, but Nia, yeah.
Yeah. So Neil, do you think, how there were sort of Obamacrat voters that were just involved in politics for Obama and weren't necessarily transferable to other Democrats, including Clinton and to a certain extent Biden? What's your sense about that sense with Trump? Are there kind of Trumpocrat or Trumpoclib? I don't know what the word would be, but sort of Trump-centric voters who you can't really transfer over to Republicans.
That's interesting. We tried. That's an excellent point. We recognize that it's only Obama can really get out those African American votes. Is it only Donald Trump who can get out some of his Trumpian supporters? I think we'll find out in 2020. We'll find out probably in Georgia, in the special election down there, because that's one reason why I think some of the senators are going a little soft right now, is because we're going to need him in Georgia. So that's a hell of a good question, and it's just time's going to tell on that one.
You mean to turn out the vote?
Mm-hmm.
In the less than 4 minutes we have left, I'm going to ask each one of you about the prospects for healing this gaping divide in our country, politically, culturally. It underlies everything we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start with you, Maria, and then end with you, Neil. But I want to know, do you see any way that this is going to improve or not?
I really hope so. I got to tell you, Judy, when I saw the election results that 71 million people had voted for Donald Trump, even though I agree with John, I think this is a huge victory for Joe Biden and we should not minimize that. But to see that 71 million people voted for a man who's a racist, a xenophobe, and a misogynist. I'm not saying that all of his voters are those things, even though some of them definitely are. But what I am saying is that for 71 million voters, the fact that the president of the United States was those things was not a deal breaker. And to me, that was just heart-wrenching, that this country is where it is and that so many people put their faith and support into somebody like Donald Trump. What I saw from Joe Biden, though, in the victory speech,
I'm going to need you to move it along.
Okay, I'm sorry. In the victory speech was that he's reached out to the other side, to people who didn't vote for him, in a way that Donald Trump never did. And so I'm hoping that will, as hard as it will be, that will go some way to some kind of healing that we desperately need.
John Harwood, do you see any hope of bridging some of the gap?
I think that of every politician in the United States, the one with the greatest capacity to bridge that gap has been elected the president. Joe Biden, by biography, by instinct, by temperament, has a unique ability to attempt that. It's very difficult. I am concerned, as Nia mentioned before, about a politics in the United States that is organized basically along racial lines. And I think the number one thing that could shake that up and create the possibility of a better politics is if the Republican Party seriously contests for the votes of non-whites. Now, in that respect, there is some positive development in the exit polls. Donald Trump did somewhat better
Right.
with Latino
Right.
voters. Some of that's explainable because they're conservative Catholics, and that aligns with the Republican Party. He, according to the exits, got 19% of the vote of Black men. I don't know why that is true, but if that is an entering wedge of a time when Republicans say we can get the votes of African Americans and Latinos, that will produce a better and less divisive American politics.
Okay, according to my clock, we've only got a minute left, but I'm going to give you a little bit of extra time. Nia Malika, what do you think? Do you have hope that?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon Republicans to stop using race and racism as a wedge issue and a political motivator, which is what we've seen from Donald Trump over these last 4 years and the Republican Party more generally over the last 30 or 40 years. There was a period, I think it was Ken Millman, who went before the NAACP and apologized for the ways in which the Republican Party had used race as a wedge issue politically. And then we kind of fast forward to Donald Trump and saw that he put these sort of white identity politics on steroids. It looks like the Republican Party that we see now in Trump's grip can't quite quit that. And I think that is the piece that has to happen. They have to drop this sort of racialized rhetoric to have some sort of healing in the country.
And finally, Neil Newhouse, I'm coming back to you at the end. Give us a dose of reality. What are the prospects for coming together?
I think it's a mistake to assume that we got here over the last 4 years. We got here over the last decade or 2 decades. It's been building. The polarization in the country has, started 20 years ago, not 4 years ago. And I think it's going to take, quite a bit of time. It is, you can't blame just the Republican Party. That's ridiculous. It's not fixing the Republican Party that's going to fix the country. Both parties need to be fixed. It's both on both sides of the aisle. And it's going to take a long time to do it. It's not going to take 4 years. It's going to take longer.
Yeah, I would say it even goes back 30 years, but that's a subject for another
50 years
panel discussion. Well, you all have been absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you on behalf of the Duke Alumni Organization, Maria Cardona, John Harwood, Nia Malika Henderson, Neil Newhouse. You're all just incredible. Thank you very, very
much. Thank you, Judy. You rocked it as a moderator.
Thank you. And I am now wanting to introduce two individuals who are with the DC Women's Forum, Catherine Abbott and Jacqueline Williams. I'm going to turn it over to you two.
Thank you so much, Judy. We'd like to thank you and all of our panelists this evening for an insightful and engaging discussion and for devoting your valuable time and talent to Duke. Thanks as well to all of the alumni and guests for joining us and submitting your great questions ahead of time. And of course, thanks to all the sponsors of this program, specifically the Duke DC Women's Forum, the Sanford Development and Alumni Relations Office, and the Duke Politics and Policy Network. A special thank you as well goes out to Louise Meyer, the Regional Director for Duke DC.